As you can tell from my extremely good command of the English language, I'm from the southern state of Australia called New Zealand. But I can say that when God created the world, it said that he finally got it right in New Zealand, but up here is pretty good too, I have to admit. So I'm going to talk about fill in a few gaps from Sharon and Sue, and then talk about a case just to demonstrate how powerful a personalised lifestyle program can be. And there's one of my favourite slides is this slide about the human evolution. And as you can see, we actually in the last 100 years, and specifically in the last 60 years, have quite radically changed the way we live. And I'm not asking you to grab a club and go back to the caves. That's not necessary. We've been discussing other things. But if you look at the risk factors for dementia, and if you look, and there's a large study, a good study called the Nigerian study, where a lot of people have the gene, APOE4 gene, which puts you at a higher risk for Alzheimer's, but they have very, very low Alzheimer's because they simply are not living like that chap at the end. They're slim, they're active, they have a whole food diet, they have very little, if any, processed food, which we know inflames our brains. And so you don't have to go back there, but clearly Alzheimer's is an epidemic and a perfect storm of our genetics and the environment that we are living in, and we can do a lot about that. Now, just to extend on the risk factors, and they're vastly different. The new one is air pollution, electromagnetic fields, sleep. Age is the highest risk factor. This thing called leaky gut, you may have heard about, the gut-brain axis. A whole range of risk factors. So if we're going to actually crack this nut about finding a solution to at least change the prognosis, we're going to have to come up with a theoretical model that would explain why on earth all these things can end up with one disease. Now, I see clients who have already been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, early Alzheimer's, and occasionally moderate Alzheimer's, as is the case I'll talk about today. But we know for a fact that this disease process has started 20, sometimes 30 years. And I've even read of children with the APOE4 gene being able to pick up different cognition even in their teens. So it's a long process, and I'm actually really optimistic of the future that we'll be able to pick this up early and do something about it. Now, I'm just going to flick through this because I haven't... one study, just to go on the exercise, just to show you the dose dependency, and this is just one study that I found, but the people in the extreme levels of fitness as they were older, they could not find a case of Alzheimer's. So that just shows you, if you are really, really fit, you're very, very unlikely to get Alzheimer's. Now, I was going to talk a little about the diet. Now, this is a dose-dependent relationship to your fasting blood sugar. So if you wake up in the morning, you've had no food, and they take your blood sugar, the higher that is, the larger the shrinkage of the hippocampus, the memory center in here. So your fasting sugar and your fasting insulin, so insulin is secreted to drive the sugar into your cells so that we can have energy, is a reasonably good reflection of how your metabolism, how you are able to burn carbohydrates. And as you get older, unfortunately, that gets, along with other things, that gets challenged. So this kind of concept of eating these, what we call high glycemic foods all day, and even the flour and the breads that we have now will really spike your blood sugar. And over time, this will develop a metabolism in you that will result in a higher blood sugar. And we'll talk a bit more about the diet, what we like to use. So putting this all together in Optimal Brain Day, just to show you that it can be done, because some of you are probably going, oh, how am I going to fit all that in? But I can tell you that the vast majority of our clients who are being diagnosed with cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's actually do achieve this with a lot of encouragement and support, but they do get it done. So Sharon talked about the circadian rhythm. There is evidence that getting some exercise first thing in the morning is a very good idea. We're going to open up our blood vessels in our brain. We're going to actually secrete neurotransmitters that will be helpful, and we're going to get going. And the early morning light is what sets our circadian rhythm, so we're more likely to have better sleep at night. And we talked about strength training. See, muscles are not just things that get us from X to Y. They're actually secrete growth factors that can go into the brain and help the brain grow those new brain connections. Now, breakfast. Now, this is a bit of a funny breakfast because you're all being told, and my mother told me, breakfast is the most important meal of the day, etc., etc. Well, that might be okay, and it's fine if you don't have dementia, but there is some emerging evidence that if you have an early meal at, say, early at 5 or 6 o'clock, and give yourself at least 12 hours before you eat again, 0 calories, two things happen. It triggers your brain, it's called autophagy, self-eating. It triggers your brain to start mopping up those toxins and debris that have been created by your thinking and by sleeping. And it also starts to create ketones, which is when you burn fat. And so in people with cognitive impairment of the Alzheimer's type, we know that almost all of them have in their front door of their brain cell where you get the glucose in to give us energy, it's partly shut. We're struggling to get glucose in, but the back door for ketones, which are created when we burn fat as a secondary source of energy, is still wide open, even in the last stages of Alzheimer's. So by getting some ketones into those brain cells can make a big, big difference. And so by delaying breakfast, having a black coffee and a good quality coffee, there is quite a lot of evidence that coffee and tea can help prevent dementia. And so that's kind of an alternative breakfast. But before you do this, you should get your doctor's approval because things like diabetes and other issues this may not be appropriate. Sharon talked about Brain HQ. I think it's clear that the biggest amount of evidence that Brain HQ is the online training that you should do. At least I think so, and that's the one we recommend. What's really good about it, that after you've been doing it for a while, the software picks up what you're weakest at, and you press a button and it's got personalised program, and you go, oh no, I don't like these because I find they're hard to do. But that's exactly what you want to do. You want to come up with a personalised program that's filling in your weakness. Now, the diet, of course, all the research has been done. We've talked about the Mediterranean diet. We put our clients on this diet, and one of the best books I read this year was by Professor Walter Longo, and it's called The Longevity Diet. And he's at University of California. He's spent $40 million of research looking at various diets and the use of fasting. But Professor Walls was a professor of medicine, and she got very progressive multiple sclerosis, and she said, her story is quite extraordinary. I've got 2 children, I am not going to die. And she went to the very experimental research, the mice studies and a whole lot of other studies, and created this diet, the optimal brain diet. And in a very simplistic form, which is why I like it, every day you've got to have 3 cups of greens, 3 cups of coloured, and 3 cups of sulphur. Now sulphur is really important to help us detox, which we're doing all the time. And that's a cabbage, but it's also the cruciferous vegetables. We put all our clients on 2 cups of broccoli sprouts, which is even up to 100 times more sulfur than broccoli. And there is some research that will help down-regulate and control the inflammation in our brain. We've all got some inflammation in our brain, but people with Alzheimer's have a lot more. So we need to try and cool that down and reduce the inflammation in order to improve their prognosis. Now then it's time for supplements, very controversial area. And what I would say to you is don't go out and buy a whole bunch of supplements. All our clients are on quite a lot of supplements, but they've been highly personalised. And what you should do is spend $25 a year on a thing called consumerlab.com. It's an excellent reference material. They are independent labs. They check out the quality and cost of all the supplements, and they summarize the research. So if you go to consumerlab.com and go improve memory, they will give you the very latest summary of the evidence about which ones might be useful, and then they'll tell you which brands in their lab they've tested are the best value for money, because you can spend a huge amount of money on supplements and not really get much benefit. In fact, Fish oil, some of the fish oils have been tested and they're actually rancid and will probably do you a little bit of harm. So you have to be very careful about that. The future is looking very, very promising. We're using some advanced sprays up the nose that can get in through the sphenoid sinus here and through the nerves into the brain. And I think there's some very exciting things for cognitive impairment coming. Well, they're here now, but we clearly need to do the controlled trials. Vitamin D hasn't been mentioned, but the New South Wales University did a study here not so long ago, and come springtime, 75% of you will either be deficient in vitamin D or definitely suboptimal. And so this whole crazy thing about, I think we stay out of the sun, is wrong. Don't get burnt, yes, but most of you are not getting enough sun. There's a vitamin D receptor on most neurons, or thousands of them, and vitamin D's actually act more like a hormone rather than a vitamin. It sits in there, turns on genes inside the cells that can help to improve cognitive function. So we get all our vitamin. I haven't got one client who's what I call an optimal vitamin D. There is a sweet spot. You can take too much, so don't go swallowing a whole lot of vitamin D. Ask your doctor, along with your blood pressure and cholesterol, I'd like to know what my vitamin D is. But get it done in springtime after a winter, and then you'll find out whether you're someone, because there are genetic, what we call SNPs, there are genetic variances. Some people can have a lot of sun and they still can't really get that level and they need supplementation. A lot of you will need supplementation, but I still think, and there is emerging science, that it's better to get your vitamin D from sunshine. There's other things going on in sunshine, things called photons, the energy of light, are probably helpful. We looked about we talked about language, music, social interaction. Now, I wanted to just briefly mention dancing again, and I put Richard Powers up there so you can look up the study. I got very fascinated about this because when you partner dance, the brain lights up like nothing else. So in 3 dimensions, you're responding to your partner, you're thinking about the next moves, you've got the music playing, and there's new research to show that the hippocampus can actually grow in size from this increased density of synapses. It's early science, and there's people working on asking the question, well, what's the very best partner dancing for the brain? And there's a thing called neurojamming, and I'm emailing the scientist, and he hasn't got back to me, no surprise, but I'm wanting to know what is he doing. But we are starting to test what kind of things. So I've taken up the Western swing, and my partner asks me sort of, well, what beat are you hearing? Because I'm not quite hearing the same beat in this. It's the offbeat, sweetheart. But it's actually really hard. I'm a musician and I'm a sportsman. And I actually found this really challenging, and I can see why it's really, really good for you. So novelty and complexity in all things, like Sharon and Sue talked about, but especially in dancing. Don't go do the foxtrot if you've done your whole life. Do something more challenging like the Western swing, I can tell you. That's quite hard. The diet. Now, this is an example of the Walls diet. This is one of my meals. It took me 10 minutes to whip up. And so, what we got here? We've got this nutrient density. That's what we're looking for. Plant-based, but some meat, and especially some fatty fish. But nutrient density. As we get older, our stomach acid drops away. Our ability to absorb nutrients drops away. So we really need to think about these 3 cups of greens, 3 cups of coloured, and 3 cups of sulphur. So literally 10 minutes to make. All of you can do it. It's not a problem. You just have to make the right choice and start to move that. And there are thousands of recipes like this. And in fact, Professor Walls, who I forgot to add, has published random controlled trials on her protocols showing reversal and improvements in multiple sclerosis on her protocols. So there is some research, but she's also got a cookbook, so you can find that online. I want to talk about meditation. This is the thing that probably challenges our clients, especially the men. The men, for some reason, are resistant to do meditation. But being in a calm, focused state is extraordinarily good for your brain. And actually, we use a thing called neural agility, which is a kind of a beating which entrains or tunes your brain into the same frequencies as a deep meditative state. So now it's actually really easy. We get people to lie down, belly breathe in from their abdomen rather than, and just listen to the music and just go into a nice restful state. And Rudolf Tanzi, who's professor of neurology at Harvard, an elite academic neurology position, has just published a book about how meditation and other things can turn on healthy genes. So this is a very powerful tool, and certainly we get all our clients on it, but it's better to do it before you have any signs of cognitive impairment. It not only can grow certain elements of the brain, it can control stress, but it can change your whole attitude to the half glass full. It really can do it. I've meditated for quite a while now, and then you stop doing it and you wonder why you're irritable again. And it really is an important investment of your time. And we've talked about sleep. Now, when I ask audience, let's ask this audience, how many people within an hour of going to sleep have watched television or looked at their phone? Right, most people. So you're not the crazy Facebook people, right? But this blue light that we're receiving can turn off the melatonin Sharon talked about by up to 20%. Now that can be the difference between a reasonably good night's sleep and a bad one. So we have to prepare for sleep and prioritize it. So this is the optimal brain day summary. As you can see, just in about 2 hours, you can exercise, brain train, meditate in an hour and a half and get on with your day. So this is the sort of thing that we get all our clients doing. I'm not going to do that. I want to just talk about and push the envelope a little bit and talk about some, and I call it experimental work. It's certainly not mainstream medicine, and it shouldn't be until we do the trials. But just to share with you why I'm optimistic about Alzheimer's, this is one of our clients, Meg. She's given me permission to share her story. You see, she's APOE4/4. What that means is she has the high-risk gene from her mother and her father. 2% of the population are like that. And depending on which study you read, they have between 50 and 80, even 90% chance of getting Alzheimer's if they live long enough. She's also got a whole bunch of other risk factors that I won't get into, but she's at high risk of getting Alzheimer's. And sure enough, when she was 60, it started getting affected memory. She was diagnosed with cognitive impairment in 2013, an official diagnosis of Alzheimer's by a neurologist in 2014. She had a very determined partner who said, I want to do everything for Meg, took her to the GP, read about hormones, put her on hormone replacement, and she had an immediate lift. She saw a naturopath who started this thing called the Bredesen Protocol, and then she heard about what we were doing. She contacted us, and we don't normally take advanced or mid-stage Alzheimer's cases, but we could tell that her partner was very supportive, so we did take her on, and she did extremely well. And within 6 months, herself and her partner said, look, I'm feeling so much better, and she's able to get on with her daily tasks herself. We'll talk a bit more about that. Now, this is some research from Neurology magazine, just to show the blue line is the decline, the inevitable decline once diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and the red line is if you have the APOE4. So not only do you get it more often, but you decline quicker. So it's just to consider that when you consider these results. And this is just an anecdotal case, but I will say that we're publishing over 50 cases sometime later this year of diagnosed early Alzheimer's and cognitive impairment that seem to have stabilized. So you'll see this on her cognitive scores. She's down to the 2nd percentile. This is a woman that has a degree. You'd expect her to be somewhere in the 70th to maybe the 90th percentile. And her Alzheimer's is such that she's down to the 2nd percentile. 6 months on the program, she's on the 6th percentile. That's the overall. But when you start to break it down into what we call these domains, you see this flexibility, processing speed, executive function, complex attention, and look at her simple attention. We'll just flick through this because we're running out of time, but her ability to pay attention, 23rd to the 70th percentile. And that's actually, when you take a detailed history, that came out, I can pay attention. I can actually think, I can plan. And she gets through the day, a woman with moderately severe Alzheimer's, alone, and her partner actually went on holiday and left her alone, which is unprecedented. She did have a family nearby that would check in, but she was doing well. And this is Meg, and she's a wonderful, wonderful human being, and she's got a really good quality of life. And we continue to personalise and refine her program. And so it doesn't stop, and you have to be very committed to this and have a very committed partner. So that's the book, and I want to reiterate, this is not mainstream medicine. It is anecdotal cases, but in this book by Professor Bredesen, and I've been over to train with him twice, he's a lovely human being, a neuroscientist who studied why brain cells die for 25 years and came up with, I think, quite a strong theoretical model, tried it on mice, it worked, and a couple of humans volunteered, and then he was surprised himself to find that it seemed to be working. So, but if you want to understand the protocol, most of it's outlined in there, and I think the future is actually quite bright. We've had 400 drug trials, and there really isn't any drug that alters the prognosis. It might give you a little temporary lift, but I think with the use of a highly personalised, comprehensive, multifaceted program, we might be able to interfere in this disease process early on and change the prognosis. So I think hopefully within 5 years, we've done the trial. Sharon and Professor Martin and I are working on doing a similar trial of a multifaceted program. And hopefully within 5 years, we'll actually have a therapeutic program that can alter this terrible prognosis for Alzheimer's. So on that good note, thank you.